My brother died today. It was our mother who found him. After years of fighting depression, of heartbreaks, self-doubt, and betrayal by loved ones, he finally had enough. It took one bullet, one tiny piece of metal, to end a lifetime's worth of misery. I walked into the house, hearing the agonizing screams of our mother. I ran up the stairs and into his room. I saw her holding her baby, begging him to breathe. The blood, my God, the blood, it was everywhere. It was splattered on the wall behind her. It almost looked beautiful, all dark red on an old and beaten-down white wall, like an unfinished painting. His blood was all over our mother. She cradled his lifeless body, screaming over and over, "Breathe. Please breathe." It didn't take long for the ambulance and the cops to arrive. They had to pry our mother's hands off him. She refused to let him go, as if she held tightly enough she could stop his soul from leaving. I talked to the cops for hours. My mother was taken to the hospital suffering from shock. They quickly ruled out homicide, especially since it was only his prints on the gun. I was oddly cold to the whole situation. He was my brother, and I loved him, but in the moment I didn't feel anything. A form of shock, or maybe guilt. I returned back home. I decided to sleep on our couch in the living room on the first floor. I would have to pass by his room to get to mine, and I wasn't ready for that. I tried to go to sleep. However, after a long day of feeling nothing, an emotion finally hit me. It wasn't sorrow or anger. It was fear. I was home alone, and yet upstairs, in his room, I could hear footsteps pacing back and forth. I awoke early that morning to loud knocking on my door. Somehow I had fallen asleep even through the fear. I ignored the knocking and carefully listened for any noise upstairs. Nothing. I blocked the footsteps from last night from my mind. A nightmare, I thought, after all. It was a long and dramatic day. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Shit, I muttered under my breath. It was her. My brother's girlfriend, well, ex-girlfriend. I really didn't want to deal with this. I reluctantly opened the door. She just stared at me with tears in her eyes. I gave her that look. That, yes, it's true look. She burst into tears. I don't know if it was seeing her cry, but I finally cried too. We held each other and cried in the doorway for what felt like ages. After some time she stopped and looked at me with tears in her eyes. Still, I motioned for her to come inside. We walked over to the couch and sat down in silence, not looking at each other, both of us preoccupied with our own thoughts. Then she looked at me and said it. I knew it was coming. The same thought was going through my head all day. You know, this is our fault. We fucking killed him. No, I finally said. We fucked up, yeah, but we didn't kill him. We didn't put the gun to his head and pull the fucking trigger. He did that. We might as well have. She whispered. Look, he always struggled with this. All his life. He is the one who gave up and ended it. He was the coward, not us. I yelled, how can you say that? She said, horrified, because it's the truth. He wasn't the only one who suffered. I suffered, you suffered, that's life. He chose to give up, I yelled. That is exactly what a coward does. She paused before she spoke again. You can call him a coward all you want. It doesn't change what we did to him. It doesn't change the fact we hurt someone who loved us. She spoke softly. My mind raced back to that night, just a few days before he died. She had been arguing with him again. In anger, he left the house. I came home to find her in the kitchen crying. Shit, they were fighting again, I thought. She looked at me and said, it's over. I always loved her, since we were kids. However, my brother did what I couldn't. I was always too scared to make a move. He went for it. I always resented him for it. I never told him, but deep down I always thought he knew how I felt about her. That night, seeing her so hurt destroyed me. I just wanted to be there for her. to let her know it would be okay, that the world hasn't ended. We eventually ended up in my room. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. I had always dreamed of this moment. That night was the best night of my life. I had been with many women before her, but nothing compared to that night with her. I learned what it meant to truly love someone. To my disdain, I realized that night I didn't just love her, I was in love with her. We fell asleep in each other's arms. This was our big mistake. I awoke the following morning with her still naked next to me. To my shock, I saw my brother standing over our bed, just staring at me with a blank face, no emotion behind his eyes. He looked just empty and drained of any life. She stayed with me the rest of the day. We didn't talk much. We were both still trying to accept that he was gone. My mind just would not stop. No matter how hard I tried, the thoughts just kept going and going. I felt a combination of emotions that day. First sorrow, then anger, but also slight happiness. Not because he was dead, but happy that she was here with me. I hated myself. I hated my brother. I hated the whole world and wanted to just fucking burn down. She left in the afternoon to return home. We had a service prepared for him early in the morning. I was alone again. I decided to make a quick trip to the hospital in order to check on our mother. She had thankfully gotten over the shock and just entered the grieving phase. We sat and just cried together. "It's no one's fault, Ma. He always had issues," I quietly said. "I know, but still you wonder if anything could have been done, if maybe we didn't do enough." She replied, "Ma, he is gone. Nothing's gonna change that. Don't punish yourself. We have to just accept that he is gone. It's just She hesitated. My baby is gone." She started crying again. I knew it was too soon for words to make her feel any better. I just stayed by her side and let her cry. I returned home around 2 in the morning. I was a bit unnerved to be here alone again. Would I hear the footsteps again? I sat on the couch, still not ready to go upstairs. There was an eerie silence. I breathed a sigh of relief. Better this silence than to think I was losing my mind. I got comfortable on the couch and slowly felt myself falling asleep. Right before I entered the dream world, I heard a faint but clear whisper ask, "Do you really think I'm a coward?" It was the day of the funeral. I couldn't breathe. Everyone was there. Our parents, our old friends, even people I didn't recognize. Most important, she was there. There was so much sorrow in the room, but I couldn't even cry with them. I couldn't breathe. I felt like a ton of bricks was blocking my chest. She noticed and took my hand and squeezed. "I know it hurts, but I'm with you," she said. I looked at her and forced a smile. She didn't understand what I was dealing with. No one in that room did. I started sweating as my breathing became more and more rapid. All the eyes of the guests looked at me with sympathy. They thought I was just mourning my dead brother. They couldn't see. I finally couldn't take it anymore. "Are you all fucking blind?" I yelled. "Can none of you see it?" With all the confused and worried faces, I realized the truth. I was alone. None of them saw what was terrorizing me. My brother, my dead brother, was standing right next to his casket, right next to his own corpse, smiling at me. It had been a few weeks since the funeral. I had not left my home since. I couldn't. She came to see me, bringing some groceries with her. "I know it's been hard on you, but you have to start trying to move on. Come outside with me. Let's go for a walk," she said. I stayed silent. I could see frustration building in her eyes. "Look," she said after some time of silence passed, "you're not the one who died. He is gone. The last thing he would want is for you to lock yourself up in here and slowly die. He would have wanted you to move on with your life." I stared at her. It broke my heart to see her like that, and worst of all was that I was the cause. As I tried to speak when he interrupted me, "She is wrong. I don't want you to move on. I want you to suffer as you made me suffer. You're the reason I am dead. You are the reason I am still in agony even in death. I cannot rest, so neither will you," he coldly said. I just stared at his lifeless face, powerless to say or do anything. He was so pale. The right side of his head had the hole where the bullet had entered. He stared at me with his brown, yet lifeless eyes, and he was always smiling, an unnatural, ear-to-ear smile. What started off as footsteps in the night turned into a nightmare I couldn't escape. He was always there, always smiling at me. I would go to bed and wake up in the mornings hoping he was gone. However, I was always greeted with a simple "Hello, brother," and that same demented smile. I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you," I cried. "I loved you. Don't apologize. You didn't hurt me," she replied. She thought I was talking to her. It wasn't her fault. She was oblivious to my brother's presence. I took a deep breath, looked into her eyes, and told her I need help. "I think I've been hallucinating. It's been 3 weeks since I've been in the hospital. They put me on many different medications, none of which worked." I was starting to get fed up with being there. He was still always there. He rarely talked. He would just stand there, smiling this cold smile, taunting me every time the doctors came in by standing right next to them. It is never easy losing a loved one to suicide. It makes you think it was somehow your fault. You have to accept that this wasn't your fault. You have to let go of this guilt. That guilt is why you keep seeing him, the therapist said. My brother stood right next to her, smiling this sarcastic smile and nodding his head in agreement. Another 2 weeks passed and still no results. More pills and sessions, and I still couldn't get rid of him. He was always there. His appearance kept slowly changing with time. His face was slowly decomposing. The skin on one side of his face was half peeled off and hanging. His teeth had rotted quickly, going from yellow to black. His eyes were no longer the beautiful brown surrounded by white, but now completely black. But worst of all was the smile. He was always smiling, a hideous and wide smile. "Look at me. Look what you did to me," he laughed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," I cried. "If you truly are, then make it right," he coldly said. "How?" I knew what he meant, but still stupidly asked. "And our torment, brother." I curled up in my bed and cried myself to sleep. I checked myself out the next morning. I came into the hospital voluntarily, so they couldn't keep me against my will. They had their chance, but their pills made no difference. I found myself standing in front of the bronze doors. My brother was now unrecognizable. He looked like a smiling corpse. Half of his jaw was missing, flesh exposing some of his black teeth and some bone. Half his skull was visible with just a few strands of hair on his head. His exposed bones still clearly showed the bullet hole. Yet he was still always smiling his tormenting smile. "You can't get rid of me like this. There's only one way. Please set us free," he said. I ignored him and walked through the doors. Finally, finding my courage, I took a deep breath and walked towards the priest. I explained to him everything. I told him about my brother's suicide and how he haunted me day and night. "Is he here now?" asked the priest. "Yes, he is standing right beside you," I quietly replied. The priest looked around, visibly uncomfortable. "Please help me. I don't know what else to do," I desperately asked. "I will do my best, but you have to put your complete faith in God. There can be no doubt. Surrender yourself to Him and He will guide you to salvation," he said. My brother laughed. "Surrender sounds like he wants you to sell your soul," he smirked. I ignored him. This isn't a possession, so an exorcism will not work. Besides, we would have to get approval from the church, and that could take weeks, the priest said. So what can we do? I asked. To pray. Pray to God for his protection and to ward off any evil spirits, he replied. We can start with the Lord's Prayer. Do you know it? I nodded my head. My brother was furious now. You can't do this to me. I'm your brother, he yelled. We started. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. My brother started to scream, not in anger, but agony. The priest continued with his prayer. I stood there with eyes shut tightly, praying that this would finally get rid of him. My brother screamed a terrible, high-pitched scream, as if he was on fire. You already killed me, and now you wish to make me suffer more. Please, brother, it burns so much, he yelled. His screams were horrifying. I never heard any scream like it. It sounded like the pain he was in was no pain that man could inflict on each other. I kept my eyes closed. I hated what it was doing to him. He was still my brother, but I needed to be free of him. I needed relief. I opened my eyes and was mortified at what I saw. My brother was burning. His rotting flesh was burning off agonizingly slow. His screams only got pounded as I saw his flesh burn to the bone. The priest continued his prayer, but looked at me with concern. My brother continued to burn. Bones were all that was left, but they were slowly charring before my eyes. He took a step toward me, but as soon as his foot landed on the floor, it crumbled to ash as his body fell onto the floor. His skull looked up at me as he reached out with one hand before the rest of his body crumbled to ash as well. Just like that, he was gone. It was quiet now. The priest was no longer praying. All you could hear was my heavy, panicked breathing. He finally spoke. It's over. You should go home, he said. He tried to keep his voice calm, but he could not hide the slight trembling in his voice. He was afraid, but he looked like he wasn't afraid of what happened, but rather afraid of me. Why would he be? I took one last look at him, then the floor where my brother was, and without a word I walked out of the church. I made my way back to our home. This nightmare was finally over. I still had so many questions. What caused this? Was that thing even really my brother? And where's my brother now? In the moment it didn't matter. I was just happy it was over. I decided to finally go to his room and clean the mess he left behind. I braced myself before opening the door, ready to see the terrible scene of dried blood everywhere. What greeted me when I opened the door was worse than I could have ever imagined. Right there at the end of the bed was my brother sitting with his cold smile. You can't get rid of me, I know. The only way this ends is if you make it right, I know, so do what you have to do. I will. Brother, I called her. I told her I was hurting and I didn't want to be alone. She came over right away. I motioned her in. She sat on the couch and I thanked her for coming. I didn't want to, but I knew what I had to do to make it right. She was sitting on the couch faced away. When I slowly walked behind her and pulled the trigger, thought my brother stood next to her body, almost there. Brother, I looked at him and then glanced at her still body on the floor. There was only one way to end this, one way to make right what we did. I slowly placed the gun in my mouth. For the first time I felt no fear, no panic. I felt cold, like my dead brother. I thought about my mother. I thought about all the decisions I made that led up to this. And then, with my eyes closed, I squeezed the trigger.